Producer Joe here from the Working Fans Podcast. And at the Working Fans Podcast, this is just a podcast that three lifelong fans created to have a place to talk comedy and pro wrestling. Now, our comedy podcast releases every Tuesday, while our wrestling podcast releases every Thursday. We release bonus episodes under the moniker Working Fans Presents every now and then. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, any major podcast provider. The important thing is just please like, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to us. Now, we have started a new thing. We are now on Amazon and Audible. So those episodes release every Monday. And that's kind of going through the archives and just releasing our old episodes in a new area. So if you want to live through the process with us again, take that journey with us again, you can find us over on Amazon and Audible. Now, if you can't get enough of us in the audio form, check out our YouTube. It's youtube.com/C/Working Fans Wrestling Pod, or just search Working Fans Podcast on YouTube. We have the whole archive is up there. And if you listen to the Working Fans Podcast, you are more than familiar with the 531. That is our signature segment where we take your top 5 lists on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, and then debate it down to a top 1. Now, guys, if you want to hear 3 guys talk shit about comedy, wrestling, life, anything, you will enjoy the Working Fans Podcast. Fans, welcome back for Working Fans Podcast, episode 111. Dave, we are almost on our 2-year anniversary.
Joe, come on now. 2 years, baby.
2 weeks away. We are not quite there yet, but I feel like a lot of our lists lately have been looking towards the future, and this week is no different. I'm not even going to ask why you picked the top 5 matches you want to see in AEW.
Don't ask. None of your business.
Because it's pretty obvious after that pay-per-view where, I mean, shit, just in the last couple months in AEW, we've had so many debuts that make so many potential matchups on the horizon for us. And I'm going to get a couple quick lists out of the way because I got a couple incomplete lists. Kenny Color from the Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group.
Getting that color. Go ahead.
Just had Punk in Black, and he has Brian Cage versus a wellness policy. But Brian Cage isn't being used well right now, so I'm not going to worry about him. And Ian Totten wants to see AEW versus the U.S. government after someone dies in one of their matches. So we got a lot of positivity early on. That's good to see.
Dude, I got something like that, too, that I'll match you. I know you want to get yours out of the way. I got a couple we got to get out of the way, too. So, former guest of the show, Evan Ginsberg. Actually, he's not like so much as I think he made a little joke list. Marco Stunt versus Brock Lesnar. No problem. Let's see. Nobleman Joe Turkel versus Lee Wong. Luchasaurus versus Skylar Lowe. Vince McMahon versus Khan. Dr. Britt Baker versus Dr. Mike Lano. Dennis
That's
versus
a good
Dennis.
one.
Yeah, versus Dennis Drill. And then Josh DeBoard. We know him for Riggers Good Hostilities.
I cannot wait to hear what he had to say. It involves Cody, or maybe the lack of Cody.
Says go out of business, and also roster goes to NXT to be released. That's what he hopes. So, and a guy who's actually a fan of AEW, Scott from Voluntown, he sent me a joke list too, but it was more because we were watching AEW. He was like, man, I can't deal with this right now. There's too many possibilities. I'll talk to you in New Japan. So he sent me Brian Danielson versus Drunk Danielson. People might remember him from the Chicago crowd. JR versus Proper Enunciation. Cage and Page versus Cage and Page. Adam Cole Bebe versus Hans. That's the guy from Monster Energy, by the way, which if you follow Being the Elite, that's how Adam Cole was killed off on a Monster Energy drink. And then Wardlow versus -1 in the cage. So those are our joke lists for the week. But anyway.
We respect Josh DeBoard. We know how he feels about AEW, so that's not a surprise. I enjoyed, at least both the other joke lists were good. Evan Ginsberg really switched it up. I mean, threw in Skylo Low.
Yeah, that was good.
Had a couple old school references. And I think in the end, AEW is not necessarily everybody's flavor. I mean, I think a lot of people want to see them succeed.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while since we've seen another company credibly rival the WWE. And it's almost like the WWE's been on autopilot for so long. They display a lack of trying, while the AEW feels like they're going all out to impress.
People are loyalists too.
Yeah.
And that's what it boils down to. And I think let's oh man, I remember this guy. This is such a crazy analogy and way more important in wrestling, but whatever. There's this guy on the Joe Rogan show. I can't remember his name. African American man.
Jamie, pull it up, please.
He converted a bunch of I think it's 200 KKK men, and he got them all to stop being a member of the Klan. And how he did it was just through these conversations. Despite being a man who should probably be outraged by their mere existence, he didn't. He would sit down with these people. He'd have conversations with these people. And through conversation and building relationships, he eventually convinced them this wasn't the right way. Now, I'm not saying this is as important as that, but I think what happens sometimes, especially in the online community, is maybe you're on the verge of giving AEW a try and you're a WWE loyalist. If you go online, some of those AEW fans, just like these hardcore asshole WWE fans, they're not going to necessarily be. We're
not talking about you, Josh DeBoard. You're one of the.
No. I'm just saying it's mostly the online community in general. I'm talking about. But it's the same thing. So you're on the verge. Maybe I'll give him a try, and then you go, but you still love your WWE. It's still your secure blanket. You don't want to give it up, right? And then you're going I'm going to give it a try, and then somebody it's the greatest night ever, blah, blah. And you might be oh, yeah, cool. And then they're fuck Vince McMahon, suck these nuts. And it's no.
Well, it's one of those things. It's easy to have an enemy that's nameless and faceless, and when you humanize those you hate, you find there's more common ground, and that's how you break it down. Right. And with WWE, they've become the Kleenex, the Coca-Cola of these things, where these are brand names that have been attached to a product. So it's not a cotton swab, it's a Q-tip.
By that analogy, I will say, not to cut you off, they do elicit a reaction. They either have love or hate.
Oh, yeah. And it's tough. But a lot of people do have hope for AEW going forward. And Dave, you're never going to guess who was the first to respond to this list when I threw it up on Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group.
I ain't going to guess. Go ahead. Tell me what you got.
Jason Gross, man. First in line every time. Jason Gross.
Oh, Jason Grossman. Mr. Grossman. I love him. Mr. Grossman. Hey!
Oh, no. Just Jason Gross.
All right, Mr. Grossman.
Well, he got nasty with his list because he's got Brian Cage versus Wardlow. This is an interesting one. Ricky Starks and Sammy Guevara versus Proud and Powerful.
Oh, shit.
Malachi Black versus Brian Danielson. Britt Baker, Jamie Hayter, and Rebel versus the Twisted Sisters. So that would be Holodead coming in with Thunder Rosa with a mystery opponent. He's got it up in the air. And Hook versus Marco Stunt. Now, if you were to pick a woman to be that third in that 6-woman tag, who would you put in? I've got legit Layla Hirsch personally.
Be a good one. Statlander's good. We got Ruby Solo in now. Soho. Yeah, those would all be good. I like Layla. Legit Layla Hirsch in there. Yeah, I'll say Statlander was the first thing that came to mind though. So I'll say her.
Yeah, so that's his list. Who do you got first for a list this week?
Oh, let's see. Glad you asked, son. we got Jesse from New Hampshire. I'm a little out of order. Actually, we'll get back to you, Jesse. Hold on a second. I got an order.
Yeah, give him the main event spot. Don't drop him out. He ain't jerking no curtain out here.
He gonna maybe get main or co-main. You're up there, Jesse. All right. Zach St. John. Oh wow, I'd say Danielson Omega, Cole versus Danielson, Cole versus Jungle Boy, Punk versus Black, Punk versus Moxley. Also, I'd love Punk versus Page too. So many possibilities.
There is. And the funny thing is, when I was writing up my list, I was looking at the choices I was making. And we didn't even limit this to the top 5 matches you want to see new guys in AEW in the next year. We just put, what matches do you want to see? And I noticed that not every one of them, but a lot of them are including the new people. Jason Gross's list, he had a couple on there that were new people, but his was mainly established ones. On the Real ZSJ's list, I heard a lot of incoming ones, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, I think it's where people's minds are at right now. And if I had one thought for AEW at the moment, I would hope that people would stop focusing on who the next new person would be and almost enjoy the roster as it is. But I think that's been so hard lately when they've just been surprise after surprise after surprise.
Yeah.
It all out where they did what, 4 debuts in one night?
And there's potentially a few more coming, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, now I'm going to give you my list next just to switch it up. I've got Punk versus Brian Danielson, obviously. Danielson versus Omega, which I believe we're lining up for. Punk versus Cody, which I think could be interesting. And what's going to be the match of the year 2022? I'm calling it right now. Daniel Garcia versus Brian Danielson. Picture it.
Oh, man.
Brian Danielson versus Adam Cole.
Giving some shine. All right, I'm going to match you then. Since you want to go, I'm going to go my list next. All right? Kiss my ass. You can't be the only one throwing some curveballs. I got curveballs all day. All right, first off, I forgot about Adam Cole when I did this list because I did it in a hurry, so I apologize. I got Punk versus MJF, though. That stood off the page for me just for promo reasons. Brian Danielson versus Kenny Omega. Obviously, we're going to see that soon. Punk versus Omega. Hangman Page versus Punk. I'd love to see Punk as a heel at some point. And I think, cutting some really crazy promos on Page being the drinker, Punk being the straight edge guy. And I think we could have some fun with that. Also, Malachi Black versus Brian Danielson. I think from the kicks and everything, that's going to be. And since you mentioned Adam Cole, I'm going to throw that in there as a Jake rule. And I'm going to say honorable mention. I'm going to agree with you.
Jake rule.
You said that? What's that?
I was just shouting out Jake rule. Jake pops
Jake rule.
every time.
Yeah. Jake
I almost want to have like a music drop at one point. Be like, Jake rule.
Jake. For you, man, we got Adam. I'm going to agree with Joe. Adam Cole versus Cody. All right. Sorry, the board. He makes the list.
Now, because you talked about leaving Adam Cole off the list, I'm going to go to friend of the show, friend of God himself, Tyler Peter gave us a list. He's got Cole versus Omega, Danielson versus Andrade, which I'm pissed I didn't put on my list.
That's a good one.
He's got Young Bucks versus Santana and Ortiz, Punk versus Pac, and FTR versus Gallows and Anderson. And I told him that's a solid list. I can't believe I didn't think of Brian versus Andrade. And he said it was a tough pick. However, Brian Danielson, still what to call him, Daniel Bryan. I feel he and Omega will happen. However, Cole will have to break away from the elite down the road. Andrade versus Danielson in AEW is appealing. Punk versus Pac would be interesting. Bucks versus LAX would be good. Love FTR. And I feel a match between them and the Good Brothers should deliver. And I told him, once again, I couldn't believe Brian and Andrade. It was tough because Darby, Jungle Boy, Pillman Jr., Jericho, and MJF as well. Christian, too. So many to choose from. And that's the thing, there are so many people and so many potential matchups that you're going to have 5, but you're going to have another 10 that you wish you added to that 5.
I like Adam Cole. There's so many good potential matchups with him, too, just in that mid-car range for a little while before he gets the main event spot. Like, he could have great matches. Like, I know he's got one probably going to come up with Jungle Boy at some point. But man, him and like Christian could tear it up. Him and Darby could tear it up. So like, there's a lot of just great potential matchups, not just on the main event side of things, but even in that middle side of things right now, where it's going to be just some fun matches. So good stuff to look forward to. Let's get back to the St. John boys. Mr. Jake St. John, he's got Brian Danielson versus Omega, Brian Danielson versus Cole, Brian Danielson versus Minoru Suzuki, Hangman Page versus Omega, and Chris Jericho versus Minoru Suzuki. It's a solid list. He's a big Brian Danielson fan, and so am I. So I respect
big Suzuki fan too.
He is. Yeah, I'm surprised he only got Suzuki in there twice.
Now, speaking of brothers, I'm going to drop a list on you from my brother. He's got Danielson versus Omega, Danielson versus Andrade, Danielson versus Cole, Punk versus Danielson, and Punk versus Omega.
Interesting, man. These lists are crazy. I'm feeling like, we got the Omega versus Punk and the Danielson versus Omega making the rounds. And then it's almost like you get a variation, too, of Punk or Danielson versus Black potentially, too. You know what? Yeah. How many times have we heard? I haven't heard John Moxley's name mentioned on this list too much. That's kind of funny.
Now, there was one on what? I believe it was Zach St. John's list.
Let's go back. I got it right here.
That you read.
He did. CM Punk versus Moxley. It was Zach.
Yeah. A good one. Now, whose list do you have next?
All right. Going off of that. Oh, man. Randy Osgood. First out of the gate. Daniel Garcia versus Brian Danielson.
Oh, see, I'm telling you.
Match. CM Punk versus Ricky Starks. I don't know nothing of this one. Adam Cole, baby, versus Hangman Page.
Okay.
Thunder Rosa versus Ruby Soho. 2.0 versus the Jungle Express. I'm thinking it's Jurassic. MJF versus CM Punk. That's another one. I've had that on there too. And Cody Rhodes versus Andrade Idaho. And I did the Jake rule and added one. Okay, so yeah, he did have an extra one in there. He actually had 7 in there. That's all right.
Double Jake rule.
Double Jake rule. Yeah, that's for him.
Now, the last list I have has Albert Bettis from Rockin' Randy's Rockin' Wrestling Group, Punk versus Danielson, Punk and Danielson versus FTR.
Oh, man.
Punk versus Malachi Black, Malachi Black versus Brian Danielson, and MJF versus Punk, mainly for the promos leading up to the match.
Okay, so we've seen a few MJF, Punk, and I think we're seeing a little more Danielson Black added to that list. All right, we got Mike Flynn coming in hot with Omega versus Danielson, Pac versus Adam Cole, Punk versus Cole, Sammy Guevara versus Omega, and Danielson versus Cole. Runner-up, since seems like it'll happen early next year, Jericho versus Kevin Steen, to finally have a match to cap off their feud from back then. Wyatt versus Black would be cool, too. So, Mike's telling some additional stuff. He's fantasy booking a little bit, too, like we're talking about. There's people that are wondering what's going to happen next, which is a great sign about the buzz for this company, right? Again, I go back to what we talked about before we even did this list, like the buzz of this company, I think, which is so good. And by the way, as we record this, we're coming off WWE had a show at SmackDown at the Garden. And I think one of the issues is, we just don't have faith for WWE to keep producing. But it was a great reviewed show. Everybody loved it. I watched a little bit of it this morning. Everything I saw looked really good. So I just hope they keep doing good stuff too. And I hope AEW keeps doing what they're doing. And it's just a good time. NWA had 2 solid pay-per-views back-to-back. And I thought they had some good television this week too. Nick Aldis cut a hell of a promo. So there's good wrestling out there right now. Let's enjoy it.
Yeah, now, do you have any more lists left? Because if not, we're in our top 3.
I got one more, baby.
Oh, man. We forgot Jesse from New Hampshire.
Jesse from New Hampshire. He's got Punk versus Jungle Boy, Punk versus MJF, Danielson versus Omega, Adam Cole versus Danielson, and Christian versus MJF. Shout out for Jesse for putting Christian on this list, too. It's a hell of a hand. All right, man. Let's get to it. Because there's a lot.
Danielson versus Omega, I think, is the obvious first choice.
Sure. I think Punk and Omega's there, too.
Punk Omega, that is. Let me see where I've got it on my list. All right. Cha-cha. Now, we got one more to put in that last spot.
I like Punk MJF.
Punk MJF is good because that is going to be a hell of a promo battle, especially after seeing what MJF did this past week for promo.
Oh yeah. So
I'm looking at this, and it is hard to kick one off this list.
I'll tell you what. Let's be different. Let's be different. Let's
Okay.
kick off Punk versus Omega. All right. This way we have a little different. We got Brian Danielson, Omega, and Punk and MJF last.
Okay, that makes sense. I was going to kick off MJF and Punk, not because it was the last one in, but because these other two would be title matches currently.
Yeah, I just think that
you got basically two of the same, where you got two debuting guys versus a champion.
Yeah.
And I think Danielson is more likely to take the title than Punk.
I agree.
Punk doesn't need the title right now. He's living on goodwill.
But I mean, you talk about a special attraction match, Punk versus MJF. Man, that's going to be the ultimate rub for MJF. I think, just being in that. That could be a game changer. I'm excited for that potential feud to happen.
So is the battle of the promos better than Danielson taking the belt in AEW, which is how the Danielson Omega match would have to end, I imagine.
Yeah. I'm such a Danielson mark. I'm biased. I'm going to go Danielson Omega. But at the same time, it's the promos to talk them into the building, right? And at the same time, it's not like when we get to that match, we got two guys that suck. We got two really good guys, too. So it's neck and neck. It's 1A and 1B. I'm going to go Omega and Danielson all day.
Yeah, I mean, no matter which one you choose, you're really not losing. You're going to get Danielson and Omega giving you amazing in-ring product. MJF and Punk would give you good in-ring, but those promos leading up would be amazing. But Dave, you know what the music means. Danielson and Omega is our top match we want to see in AEW in the next year. And guys, tune in. Let us know in the comments the matches you want to see. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? You know where to find us. We will talk to you later.